Montana Territory, June 1883. The river had already swallowed a wagon that morning. Willa Carrigan stood at the edge of the swollen Gallatin River, her skirts heavy with mud, her boots soaked through, and her heart thudding like a drum in her chest. Rain clung to the last edge of the storm behind her, but up ahead the sky cleared over the valley, as if daring her to try crossing. Her mare, Daisy, pawed the ground nervously. She looked back once. There was nothing left behind her. Just an empty trail, the wreckage of a stagecoach half buried in the mud, and the fresh ache of being left behind again. "You planning to cross that alone?" The voice came from a man on horseback, just up the bank. He sat tall and easy in the saddle, but he had the wary look of someone who had seen too many things go wrong too fast. His hat shadowed his face, but the set of his jaw was sharp. He had a rifle slung across his back, and the sort of presence that made a person stop breathing for a second. "I do not see many other options," she said, brushing a strand of wet hair from her cheek. He swung down from his horse. "That current will drag you, and the horse under before you make it halfway." "I do not need a lecture, sir." He paused, then offered a quiet nod. "Name's Gideon Wallace. I've lived along this river 10 years. I know it when it's lying, and when it's out for blood." He stepped closer, his boots squelching in the muck. "Do you have family waiting?" "No," her voice caught, and she cleared her throat. "No one's waiting." He looked at her for a long moment. "Then I reckon I will help you get across." "I did not ask for help." "You did not have to." They tethered Daisy to his gelding, and Gideon showed her how to wrap her skirt up high so the river would not pull her under. His hands brushed hers only briefly, but they were warm, calloused, steady. She did not say thank you. He did not expect it. The crossing was hell. The river was faster than it looked. Water surged to Willa's waist, and the horses pitched and fought against the current. Gideon stayed beside her, one hand firm on her reins, the other holding his own. At one point her boot slipped on a submerged stone, and she lost her balance. Gideon caught her fast, his arm around her waist, dragging her back upright. "Keep your eyes on me," he said, low and fierce. "Not the water."
"Me." She did.
When they reached the far bank, both of them dripping and breathless, she collapsed onto the grass. Gideon knelt beside her, watching her carefully. "You all right?" She nodded. "Yes." She blinked up at him. "Thank you." He looked away, jaw tightening. "You had someone. Once." "How do you know?" "Because I did too." "You carry it the same way." They sat in silence for a while. The sun broke through the clouds at last, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine. "I was going to Bozeman," she said finally. "I can ride that far. Make sure you get there safe." She hesitated. "Why?" He stood. "Because I do not like leaving people alone on the far side of a river." They rode slowly through the valley. Willa said little, but she noticed things: how Gideon always rode just slightly ahead, clearing the path. How he checked her saddle twice without making a show of it. How he did not ask questions she did not want to answer. By nightfall they reached a dry stand of trees. Gideon built a fire while she saw to the horses. They ate jerky and dry bread in silence. "You got a name?" he asked. "Willa Carrigan." He nodded. "Well, Willa Carrigan, you are tough enough to make it across a river most men would not try." "I did not have a choice. Sometimes that is when we find out who we are." She looked at him, really looked this time. His face was weathered, but not hard. His eyes were green, steady, and quiet in their strength. "What happened to yours?" she asked softly. "My wife died 5 years ago. Fever took her, and our son. Never even had time to fetch a doctor." "I am sorry." He offered a grim smile. "I stopped talking about it a long time ago. Feels strange saying it now." She looked down at her hands. "My husband left last winter. Took our boy Benjamin. Said he was going to California for work. Never came back. I got a wire 2 weeks ago. He died of snakebite in Arizona. Left Benjamin with some mining couple near Tucson. I sent word, but no one's answered. Gideon's jaw clenched. You're going to get him? She nodded, her mouth tight. I have to. I will take you. She blinked. What? I will ride with you. To Arizona. You should not do that alone. I cannot ask that. You did not ask. She stared at him, her throat thick. Why would you do that? He looked at her, quiet and steady. Because I lost a boy. And I do not want you to lose yours. She did not answer. She just looked at him, the firelight catching in her damp hair, something fragile and fierce in her eyes. Later, when they lay beneath the stars, she turned toward him in the dark. Gideon? Yeah. Thank you. For pulling me out of that river. His voice was low. You pulled yourself out. I just made sure you did not go under. She smiled faintly into the dark.
Still.
I think I would rather not be alone anymore. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, me neither, Willa. She did not reach for him. He did not reach for her. But something between them shifted soft, sure and real. And this time the current was carrying them forward. The next morning, the fire had burned down to ash and the grass steamed beneath the early sun. Willa rolled up her bedroll with practiced hands, the stiffness in her shoulders a quiet reminder she hadn't slept outside in some time. Gideon had already saddled the horses. He didn't say much, but he handed her a tin cup of coffee, warm and bitter. They rode south along the trail, past stands of lodgepole pine and clusters of wild lupin. The land opened wide, bright with the scent of thawed earth and the crackle of melting snow feeding unseen creeks. Willa kept her gaze ahead, but every so often she felt Gideon's eyes on her steady, like he was still watching for a current that might sweep her off course. You ever been south of here? He asked once the ground dipped into a long, sloping valley. No farther than Idaho Falls, she said. My husband never liked to stay in one place, but he always circled back. Gideon didn't answer right away. His expression didn't change, but his voice was quieter when he spoke again. You think that couple in Arizona's keeping the boys safe? I can't afford to think otherwise, she said. If I do, I won't make it there standing.
He nodded slow.
That's fair. They rode until the sun tilted west, stopping at a small way station nestled against a grove of cottonwoods. The inn was no more than a square log house with a lean-to for travelers' horses, but it smelled of stew and tobacco smoke and something warm baking on the hearth. The station keeper, a man with a crooked shoulder and a limp, welcomed them with a nod and a glance at their trail-worn clothes. Rooms upstairs, 2 bits each. Supper's venison and beans. Willa dug for coins in the pocket of her skirt, but Gideon placed his hand over hers. I've got it. She looked up. You don't have to. I know. They took separate rooms, but the walls were thin, and Willa could hear the creak of the floorboards when Gideon paced. She didn't sleep much. Her mind drifted to a boy with dark curls and a gap between his teeth, to the way he used to chase field mice with a stick, to the last time she'd kissed his forehead and said she'd be right back. She hadn't known then that right back would become 6 months and counting. At dawn, she found Gideon out back, brushing his gelding's mane with slow strokes. There's a freight wagon leaving for Fort Bridger today, he said. We could ride along beside it. Safer that way, less chance of trouble on the road. She took up Daisy's bridle, fingers tightening at the thought. Trouble tends to find me anyway. He glanced at her, eyes unreadable. Then I'll be there when it does. They rode with the freighter through the narrow pass, the wagon creaking under its load of trapper goods. The teamster, a man named Cal, talked enough for all of them stories about frozen winters near the Wind River Range, about losing half a foot to frostbite, about a woman he'd left behind in Salt Lake who still wrote him letters he never answered. You two married? Cal asked, jerking his chin toward Willa. Gideon looked over at her, but didn't say anything. "No," Willa said. "He's just helping me get somewhere."
"Shame," Cal said.
"You ride together like you belong." Willa didn't answer, and neither did Gideon. But she noticed he didn't ride ahead that day. He stayed beside her, their horses moving in rhythm. By late afternoon, a light wind picked up, carrying the scent of sagebrush and far-off rain. That night, they camped along a dry creek. Stars scattered across the sky in clusters, and the fire crackled low between them. Willa pulled her coat tighter and let the silence settle. It didn't press against her the way it used to. "You ever think about starting again?" she asked. He watched the fire.
"I did. Once."
"Before the fever came." "I mean now." He didn't answer right away. "Then, I don't know what that looks like anymore." She took a deep breath. "I used to think starting over meant pretending none of it happened. But maybe it means carrying a different, lighter." Gideon looked at her then, and the firelight caught the faint lines near his eyes. "You're stronger than you let on." "I'm tired of needing to be." He nodded. "You don't have to be. Not every minute." She didn't move closer, but something softened between them. A thread pulled taut, then eased. When the fire burned low and the air turned cold, he stood. "You take the bedroll tonight." "I'll keep watch." "You always keep watch."
"Not always," he said.
"Just when it matters." Willa lay awake long after, listening to the sound of his boots pacing slow through the sand. She thought of the river, of how the current had felt when it yanked at her legs. And she thought of the hand that had held her steady. Somewhere beyond the ridge, Arizona waited. But tonight, she wasn't crossing anything alone. By the time they crossed into Utah territory, the land had turned brittle and red-veined. The sky stretched wide and bone-pale. Dust clung to Willa's eyelashes, and the wind carried the dry rasp of distant coyotes. They passed a herd of sheep one morning, tended by a boy no older than 10, and Gideon had offered him a strip of jerky without a word. The boy took it and ran back to his flock, boots kicking up chalky soil. Willa watched him go, then turned to Gideon. "You ever think what it would have been like, raising your son out here?" He adjusted the strap of his canteen. "Every day. Would have taught him how to track mule deer across shale. How to listen for where water runs under dry ground." She nodded, quiet. "I think about what my boy remembers. If he still says my name when he wakes." They didn't speak again until they reached a settlement perched against a rocky ridge, no more than a handful of buildings sunken into the dust. A general store, a smithy, and a boarding house with a crooked porch. Willa stepped off Daisy and rolled her shoulders, eyes drawn to the shade under the eaves. Gideon handed her the reins. "I'll see if there's a map inside. Arizona's close now. Best know the best cut through the canyons." She headed toward the trough where a pair of horses drank, brushing dust from Daisy's flank. A woman in a faded calico dress came out of the store, arms full of flour sacks. She paused when she saw Willa, eyes narrowing slightly. "You're headed south?" the woman asked. Willa straightened. "Yes." "You got someone with you?" "I do." The woman's gaze flicked toward the door, where Gideon had gone.
"Good.
Don't ride alone past the San Juan line. A rancher's boy was found stripped of his boots and horse last week. Folks say it's bandits. I say it's men who never learn to work for what they take." Willa nodded. "Thank you." The woman gave her a long look. "You got the look of someone who's lost more than she should." "I have." "Then make sure you don't lose what's left." Inside, Gideon was bent over a map spread across a counter, finger tracing a narrow pass that cut southeast toward the Colorado River. "We ride through here," he said when she stepped up beside him. "It's steep, but it'll save us 3 days. Do we have enough water?" "There's a spring near the base. If it hasn't dried up." She leaned closer, following the line of his hand. The space between them felt smaller than before. That night, they camped near a low bluff, the wind sharp with sand. Gideon unrolled his bedroll beside hers, closer than he'd done before. They didn't speak for a long time. Willa lay staring at the stars, the skin of her arms cooling under the breeze. Then she said, "I was 17 when I married. Never knew what I wanted, just knew I didn't want to stay where I was." He didn't turn toward her, but his voice came low. "What did you leave behind?" "A mother who thought silence was safer than love. A father who drank the good parts of himself away." She waited, then asked, "And you?" "I left Missouri after the war. Couldn't stand the sound of boots on wood floors. Moved west 'cause the air was quieter." She turned toward him. "You never remarried?"
No.
"I never met anyone who looked at silence the way I do." She watched his face, half in shadow. "And how's that? Like it's something to build inside, not run from." Her breath caught. She reached out slowly, fingers brushing his. He didn't move away. "I don't know what comes after this," she whispered. "Neither do I," he said. "But I'll ride every mile of it with you." She felt the truth of it settle in her chest, not loud, not sudden, but sure, like rain softening earth. And for the first time in months, she slept without reaching for what was already gone. The sandstone narrowed into a gorge by late afternoon, walls rising high and close, stained with ages of wind and water. The air turned still, heavy with heat and grit. Willa rode behind Gideon, eyes on the trail winding between shadowed rock and scattered mesquite. The map he'd studied proved true. This pass cut through the worst of the canyons, but it asked a price in sweat and silence. Midway through, they came upon a lean to half collapsed against the base of a cliff. A rusted tin pan hung from a nail, and nearby, a circle of scorched stones held the ghost of an old fire. Gideon drew his horse to a stop and dismounted. Willa followed, her knees stiff from the ride. He crouched near the fire ring, fingers brushing the edge of charred rock. "Someone camped here not more than a week ago." "Freight team?" He shook his head. "Boot prints are too narrow." "Single horse, maybe two." He stood, brushing dirt from his palms. "We keep moving." They pressed on, the path narrowing until brush clawed at their boots and the sun came in slanted ribbons. A jackrabbit startled near Willa's mare and bounded into the scrub. She leaned forward, whispering to calm the horse, her voice low and even. At dusk, they made camp in a sheltered bend where the canyon split. Gideon gathered dry brush, while Willa took the canteens to a seep trickling from the cliff wall. She crouched, filling them slowly, letting the water cool her wrists. The stillness of the place settled on her shoulders, not heavy, just honest. When she returned, Gideon was laying out a tin of dried peaches and a strip of smoked pork. He passed her the fruit without a word, then sat cross-legged across the fire. She chewed slowly, the sweetness catching her off guard. "Where'd you get these?" "Traded for and back in Fort Bridger. Figured you'd like something that didn't taste like dust for once." "I do," she said, voice soft. "Thank you." Gideon nodded, then leaned back on one elbow, eyes following the line of stone above them. "There was a girl once. Before my wife. We were 16. Her family ran sheep, mine ran cattle. That didn't sit well with either side." Willa glanced up. "What happened?" "She married someone else before winter. I joined the war the next spring." She didn't press. Instead, she pulled her knees to her chest and rested her chin on them. "I had a sister, Nora. She used to draw birds from memory. Couldn't read a word, but she'd sit for hours with charcoal and paper. She caught scarlet tanagers once, perfect right down to the wing stripe." "Where is she now?" "Fell through ice on the Madison River. I was 12. She was 10. They sat quiet for a long time. The fire popped, and the wind whistled low through the canyon, like a voice too tired to raise itself. Gideon stirred. "You've carried a lot, Willa." Her voice barely rose. I didn't know how not to. He reached across the space between them, his hand grazing hers. He didn't hold it, didn't force anything. Just let the warmth pass like a promise he hadn't spoken yet. She didn't pull away. Later, long after the fire had burned low, she turned toward him in the dark. When we reach Tucson, I don't know what we'll find. We'll find your boy, he said, certain. And after that? He was quiet then. Then we go where we're needed. If that's the same place, I won't ask for more. She reached for him then, fingers finding the calloused edge of his hand. I want to build something steady. Not grand. Just honest. His voice came low against the hush of the canyon. Then let's build it. One quiet day at a time. She let the words settle deep. Not rushed. Not taken. Chosen. By morning, they'd ride again. The final stretch lay ahead, sun rising behind them, casting long shadows that would shorten with every mile. But for now, in the hush before dawn, they lay side by side on solid ground, each breath a quiet vow. They reached Arizona territory under a midday sun that burned without apology. The trail had flattened into hard-packed clay, the color of rusted copper, and the air carried that bitter scent of juniper and dust-baked stone. Willa's shirt clung damp at her back, and Daisy's sides darkened with sweat, but she didn't slow. Every mile south pulled something tighter in her chest until her breath sat shallow and her thoughts narrowed to a single point: Benjamin. They rode into the outskirts of Tucson in the quiet of late afternoon. The town pulsed with heat. Adobe walls threw back the sun, and canvas awnings sagged over shop fronts. A freight wagon pulled past, its wheels kicking up the kind of dust that didn't settle for hours. Gideon pulled up beside her. You sure this is the place? She nodded once. The letter said they lived near the mission. Names were Cora and Thomas McGinnis. He dismounted, tying his horse to a rail outside a smith shop. Then we ask. They walked the rest of the way, boots scuffing along the packed road. Willa's steps slowed when they reached the small row of homes behind the chapel, each one square and low, shaded by cottonwood or mesquite. Children's voices echoed faintly from an alley, and somewhere a screen door snapped shut. A woman stepped out from the second house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her hair was bound in a loose twist, streaked with gray, and her brows drew together as Willa approached. Are you Cora McGinnis? Willa asked. I am. You must be Miss Carrigan. Willa's throat tightened. Yes. Is he? Cora looked past her, eyes landing on Gideon briefly before returning to Willa. He's inside. He's been waiting. Willa didn't remember crossing the short stretch of yard. Her legs moved without instruction, and then she was stepping over the threshold into a cool, dim room that smelled faintly of lye soap and dry bread. Benjamin sat at the table, feet swinging just above the floor, a book open in front of him. His hair had grown longer, curling behind his ears. His face had thinned some, but when he looked up, Mama, she dropped to her knees, arms open, and he ran to her like the earth had tilted to carry him forward. She held him hard, pressing her face to his shoulder, breathing in the scent of sun and dust and boy. Her voice broke as she whispered his name, again and again, until the sound became a prayer. Behind her, Gideon stood just outside the door, his hat held in both hands. He didn't speak, didn't move, just waited. That evening, they sat on the porch, the air cooling as light shifted across the desert. Benjamin curled against Willa's side, already dozing, a blanket tucked around his legs. Cora brought out 2 cups of chicory and set them down without comment. Tom's out checking fence, she said. He'll want to say goodbye in the morning. You've been good to him, Willa said. He's a good boy. Quiet but kind. He missed you something fierce. I'll never leave him again. Cora nodded once, then returned inside, leaving them to the hush of twilight. Gideon sat on the steps below her, one boot resting on the lower rail. He glanced back at her. You did it. We did. He looked at Benjamin, then out toward the horizon where the stars were beginning to show. What now?
I was thinking about that, she said.
There's land north of here. A little creek runs through it. Not much, but enough for a garden and a few chickens. You planning to build something? She smiled. I was hoping we might. He turned fully then, eyes meeting hers. You sure? I've been sure since the canyon. I want a life with you, Gideon Wallace. A home that doesn't have to forget the past to hold the future. He stood slowly and stepped onto the porch beside her. When he reached for her hand, it felt like something solid settling into place. I'll build it with you, he said. Every beam, every nail. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. And you'll stay. I'll stay. Benjamin stirred lightly, and Willa brushed a hand over his hair. The stars above sharpened, the sky stretching vast and still. Months passed. Spring softened the edges of the land. The house Gideon built stood with thick walls and a wide porch. Willa planted corn and beans in the back patch, and Benjamin learned to track rabbits through mesquite. He laughed now, often and loud, the kind of laugh that carried. Gideon rose early each day, splitting rails and fixing fence, his shirt damp with honest sweat. Sometimes, in the quiet between chores, he'd take her hand and lead her behind the house, where the cottonwoods grew tall, and they'd sit with their knees brushing, watching the wind move through the grass. He never asked for more than she could give. And she gave everything. One evening, as the sun burned low and the scent of bread drifted from the open window, Willa stood in the doorway and looked out at the man stacking wood beside their son, the two of them working in rhythm. She stepped forward, heart full, voice low.
Come in.
Supper's ready. Gideon looked up, eyes warm. We'll be right there. And they were. Together. Always.